Welcome to Face the State. I'm Ariana Bennett. Thank you for joining us. Well, it is the biggest water year on record for Northern Nevada and the Sierra, and it really couldn't have come at a better time following years of drought. But now we have to manage all that water, or it really could become a problem of its own. A federal Watermaster, Chad Blanchard, is here now to talk about all of that. Chad, thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Now, federal Watermaster, I mean, aside from being the coolest title ever, is probably not something a lot of people know about. So tell me what your job is, what you do.
Well, I am an officer or special master of the U.S. District Court appointed to enforce the provisions of federal court decrees, the Alpine Decree on the Carson River and the Ordich Decree on the Truckee River.
Okay, so when we talk about that from like functional terms, you describe for me what you control, like what's your day-to-day?
So number one is operating the river and the reservoirs. So first thing we do 7 days a week, 365 days a year, is check on the river, the reservoirs. We have a report that I have to put out every day. And again, holidays, weekends, it has to come out so we know what's going on in the system. We check and determine what the river flows are, what the storage levels are, what we're releasing, how much we're storing in the reservoirs. And again, that goes out first thing in the morning, and all the stakeholders have that information. Then we use that information to do all the accounting in the system, because all the water in the system, either in storage or in transit, deliveries have to be accounted for. And we have to know who's taking what, who's entitled to what, and we monitor that. We monitor all the diversions out of the river, both for municipal, Tumwa's diversions, and agriculture, all the individual diversions that come out for people to use on their fields. And then we keep track of water rights.
Yeah, no, it's an important job, I think, obviously, in the high desert. On a normal year, important. This year, even more important. You know, we're looking at the highest river we've seen in a really long time. I can't remember seeing the river looking like this, short of the '97 floods, and then the Tahoe water level being high. So tell me about our water levels right now.
First of all, normal year. There's really very few normal years. Obviously, when you look at history, and we have good records that go back till 1900 as far as reservoirs and river flows. We also have precipitation records that go back to 1910. So normal is kind of a misnomer, but we are in the middle of an extraordinary year. It's been amazing as far as the amount of precipitation and the amount of snow we have. A lot of times we'll have huge snow years, but all of it falls as snow. The total precipitation might not be all that great. Other years we have a lot of precipitation, but the snow, a lot of it falls as rain up there, and we don't have a lot of snowpack. This year we've had both, and it's just absolutely tremendous in what we're seeing as far as precipitation, snow totals, and then now starting to see is runoff totals.
And then, you have to decide how to manage the water flow so that we don't get too inundated, right?
Right, it's all a balancing act. We have to figure out what's coming into the reservoirs, how much room we have in the reservoirs, how much we have to pass, how much time we have to pass that. And it's all comes down to tools. We have great forecasts that we get from the National Weather Service's hydrology branch, which is the River Forecast Center in Sacramento. And we also get information from the Natural Resource Conservation Service, or NRCS, that helps us determine how much water is going to melt out of the snowpack, when it's going to come. Then we have to take that information and run it through models and operate the system based on the rules of the system. And it helps us get an idea of different scenarios. What happens if we have a lot more weather, or a lot more water to come than we're thinking, right in the middle, or even less. And then we have to balance that to make sure that we can adjust. If it ends up being wetter than we think, we have to be able to adjust and increase flows and pass more water. If it ends up being drier, we have to be able to cut back and still hopefully fill everything. So it's definitely a balancing act, and it's something that we have to do every day. And luckily we have great tools and great people to help in that process. Now,
I understand you've been releasing some water out of the reservoirs to make room for the immense amount of snow melt that you're expecting. So tell me about that.
Well, first of all, Lake Tahoe, obviously, we started the year more than a half a foot below the natural rim, which means there was zero water in the reservoir storage. The natural rim is the point where, as the lake comes up to it, that is where basically the water just starts to flow over the rim down to the dam and out the river. So if we're at the rim, the river is dry. So as we start coming up, then the water can flow into the river. We started out a half a foot below the rim plus, and now we are spilling significant amounts because we have more coming in than we have room for. So this will be the largest physical rise we've ever seen as far as Tahoe is concerned in 118 years of record.
Wow.
It's also going to be by far the biggest inflow, total inflow, from the low point of Tahoe to the when we peak in 118 years, and it'll beat the previous record by over 20%, which is incredible.
Okay, now I'm remembering from when I was younger and we would go to the beach at Tahoe and there was, physical beach, like a lot of it. And you go up there now and there's almost nothing. Can the water keep rising to a point where it becomes problematic at Tahoe, or will it just automatically self-regulate?
Well, no, it's definitely not self-regulating. We have to operate it to prevent it from exceeding the upper limit. There's an agreement in 1917 that set an upper limit that we have to stay to insofar as practicable, and that language is put in there because the inflow that can come into the lake can be significantly higher than our release capacity. Right. So we have to plan ahead of time and try to get water out as early as we can. But again, we have to balance that and make sure that we can cut back and fill if it's drier than we think, or still have room to increase the releases if it ends up being wetter than we think.
Right, so is there a concern with the amount of snowpack we have? It's pretty unprecedented that it might melt off faster than the rate you can release the water and cause some problems at Tahoe?
Well, we're hoping to stay ahead of that. That's why we're constantly evaluating and adjusting that. The biggest problem at Tahoe would be precipitation, because the lake itself is 40% of the basin surface area. So the whole Lake Tahoe basin, 40% of that basin is the lake itself. So when we get precipitation events, even snow on the lake itself, we can have significant inflows of water. So that is more of the threat as far as Tahoe goes than just the snow melting. The snow is kind of set, physics determines how much water can melt out of the snowpack on a daily basis. And so it doesn't matter if there's 30 feet of snow or 3 feet of snow, only so much water can melt out during a day. So that is somewhat controlled. Obviously, it depends on how much surface area is covered by that snowpack and how much is contributing at one point to that runoff. But for as long as the forecast is right, and unless the forecast is really low and we get much more than we're expecting, there shouldn't be an issue with just snow melt. Now, obviously, the issues would come from large precipitation events.
Okay, so fingers crossed for less rain. So basically, are you saying you're not too concerned about flood risk, as we go into the summer?
Not terribly concerned about flood risks. There are definitely small streams. There are issues with some of the runoff into the lake, and we've all seen the videos of neighborhoods in Tahoe having water run down the streets or through yards. Now that's obviously always going to be a concern with big years. However, the main stem of the Truckee, we should be able to control it, and the Lake Tahoe releases hopefully will have enough capacity and be able to fluctuate those releases and keep it in check.
Okay, we got a couple minutes left. I know people have some concerns about this situation. So what message do you want people to take away from all that in terms of flooding and snowmelt?
Well, first of all, we get a lot of questions on why the reservoirs are so low right now. The other reservoirs, Prosser, Boca, and Stampede. In fact, answering questions today. And the Corps of Engineers, those are flood control reservoirs, and the Army Corps of Engineers has criteria that we have to follow during the winter months that keeps free space in the reservoirs in case it rains. Then we can shut the releases off so we're not contributing to the flow downstream, and we capture that inflow and help reduce the flooding down here. We have to maintain that. Typically we can start filling April 10th and be full May 20th, but when there's a significant snowpack on the mountain like there is now, that pushes that filling curve back. We can't start filling until a certain amount of snow has melted and come off. And so we still have that free space in those reservoirs. We still have the flood control space at this point. We probably, depending on how fast the snow melts, we may be held to back till June 1st before we can start filling into those flood spaces. It just depends on how it melts and what we end up with between now and then as far as precipitation. So we still have our flood control, we still have our safety net. Things can happen. We've had large May storms. 1996, we had a very large rainstorm in May. If that happened, like right now when the snow is ripe, you know, we could have some concerns. But for the most part, the amount of precipitation and the type of storms we get in the spring start reducing. The largest May ever was a little bit less than 5 inches of precipitation at Tahoe, where the winter months we can get 20, 22 inches of precip in a month from big storms. So it would come at a more critical time because the snow is melting and it's ripe and everything's charged up. So it wouldn't take as much rain to cause flooding. However, again, it typically does not happen this time of year.
Okay, good to hear. Well, we just have about 30 seconds left. Do you have any final note before we go?
Again, it's just, we're just balancing the system and working every day, and we have great tools, more tools and better tools than we've ever had. You know, I've been doing this for 25 years. We've been through a lot of big years, nothing this big, but we have a lot of tools and great people to help us do that, and I think we'll be okay.
All right, Chad, thank you so much for
Thank
your
you.
time. I sure appreciate it. Well, coming up on Face the State, you may have noticed a little change on your water bill. I'll sit down with a Tumwa official to find out why rates are going up right after the break.